Welcome to Dialogue on Teaching. I am Nancy Lynn Westfield, Director of the Wabash Center. Paul Myrie, Senior Associate Director, is in the Sound Engineers booth. This episode focuses on issues of parenting, scholarship, and self-care. For this session, we are recording both video and audio. Our guests for this important conversation are women who are parents, theologians, and scholars. Welcome to the program, first, Lakisha Lockhart. Lakisha is Assistant Professor of Practical Theology at Chicago Theological Seminary. Welcome, Lakisha, to the conversation. Next, we have Sarah Farmer. Sarah is Assistant Professor in the Department of Theology and Ministry at Indiana Wesleyan University. Thank you, Sarah, for being here. And our third voice in the conversation is Ekaterina Lamparis. Dr. Lamparis is the Richard B. Parker Assistant Professor of Theology and Wesleyan Thought at Portland Seminary, George Fox University. Thank you, friends, for being here. This is a very important conversation. So we want to talk about parenting because the Academy of Theology and Religion is, I'm going to say it this bluntly, is hostile to women who have had children, is hostile to people who are parenting. So we want to not kind of beat around the bush and not say it from jump, right? One of the reasons why we're even having this conversation is because the women, we're particularly talking to the women, the mothers, the women who are participating as parents and scholars, as parents and theologians, as parents and people who are immersed and passionate about their work in the academy, have a day-to-day struggle with these issues. So somebody get us started. I'm just going to throw it out in the mix, or without calling names, somebody get us started. What's so challenging? Help frame what's so challenging. Lakisha, I'll start with you. What's so challenging about this? State the obvious.
It's challenging because it doesn't get acknowledged, and we're expected to be just as productive as all of our counterparts without taking into consideration that we are mothers, or whether we're pregnant or whether we maybe adopted or we have little ones around. It takes time, energy, significant amounts, and to expect the same level of output just feels inequitable in a lot of ways. And it's just really exhausting to try so hard to try to meet those expectations, and to not even have this very real reality that many women in the academy have faced taken seriously, taken and considered in processes, and considered in leaves, and considered in tenure, and considered in every other facet when it's so important. So for me, that's just the big struggle of the inequity and expectation of productivity and of just not being considered along the way.
That's right. And I think because the expectation is there, though it's inequitable, it creates a sense of guilt and shame when you can't fulfill it.
Yes.
And so in one sense, you're guilty. You feel guilty for not doing it because that's what you have to do to prove yourself, right, as a scholar in the academy. At the same time, you feel guilty for not doing it because you know you have to care for your body, and you know it's a cost to your household. It's a cost to your children when you've invested so much energy and time into scholarship and not into caring for yourself. I'm not even just talking about caring for them. I'm just saying caring for yourself so that you can show up, because it matters how you show up to places. And so I think that's another hard piece when we're talking about what it means to be a mother in the academy.
Ekaterina, go ahead.
This is, I absolutely agree with what my wonderful colleague friends just acknowledged. And the problem is that academy, it matters what we produce, but it also matters how fast you produce what you produce. That's the whole idea of tenure track, right? You have to publish a particular amount of hopefully high quality work within a particular time frame. And it's very challenging for mothers with young children because you have all this additional unexpected kids related things kind of cutting into your schedule. For example, as a mother of 3 young children, I know one of my child gets sick that there goes my work day, or part of my work day, which I would otherwise spend writing perhaps. And obviously I don't want to speak for everyone, and I know that there's probably a lot of my wonderful colleagues with older children or without children who also have different challenges for their time. But the fact of the matter is that having young children is a significant challenge for the productivity. And I'm just not someone, and I think we all would say that as mothers of young children, we can't just, let's say, spend an evening catching up on our research, which I think is oftentimes important, but we have to spend an evening attending to our children's needs. And I oftentimes find myself again, and that's when my working children are in bed, and they just go back and they write. And obviously this kind of work hours, which last all day and late into night, this is difficult. That's difficult. So I oftentimes think that our productivity, it's really, as Lakisha just said, it has to be judged somewhat differently, because I often wonder if my colleagues who are mothers of young children, if they essentially just, they produce, their true productivity is underestimated, given how few work hours they have compared to some other wonderful colleagues.
So much of the issues that you're raising have been solved in corporate America through labor laws. The academy is slow to catch up, slow to align, slow to reinforce a regular hourly work week that lays out the expectations of what's going on. And the academy still is aligned with the married man whose wife will take care of the children so he can work after work or on weekends toward his productivity. And it just so happens that the women who are now scholars that this culture is not designed for usually don't have a wife to take care of the children, right? No. After hours or on weekends, right? So the labor, that's what you're talking about, is the double work that is required in a culture that's still a surprise when women have not made their lives to be like men's lives have been for many generations.
Absolutely. And I would even add, even just thinking about, looking at some of the leave policies or the parental leave policies that are, in place. Some are 6 weeks, 12 weeks. I'm thinking, I'm just thinking about when, I had mine, it happened unexpectedly. There were some complications. Then I had a blood clot. Like that lasted 4 months. And yet I was still expected to produce. I was still expected to put work. And so it's that space of also, how do we have better policies in place to realize that things happen? Maternal mortality rate. I identify as a Black woman. So Black woman mortality rate is very real as well. And like care when you're in the hospital. And so just realizing that all of that affects how we produce, affects how the system is just set up not for us, or not thinking about how we need to care for ourselves. We're so ready we have to produce when we get back. So we don't have the time to fully, get reacclimated to and then the guilt and so then it's like, okay, I need to make sure I'm seeing my therapist. I need to make sure I'm doing this too, because there's so many dynamics. And I just feel like it's not set up to be as supportive for that, because we're not men with wives. We are the ones that are doing this work. And it's exhausting.
Yeah, and I think in some ways it's even part of the frustration is portrayed as a weakness, right?
Yes.
And so that I can't get right back up after I've produced a child, another person came out my body, and I can't get right back up and produce in the same way. It seems like it looks like it makes us look weaker.
If you would just manage your time better,
right?
Right? If you would just...
Exactly. Right? And it's like, but you have no idea, if I'm nursing, what that takes out of me. You have no idea that I've worked a full day, and when I go home, there's another emotional investment. I have to be present. Like, you have no idea all the things that it requires to be present in both places. And so I think that's also part of the challenge of it, is how you're viewed and how you're perceived, and then how you internalize that, because you want to look a particular way. You want to look competent. You want to look like you've earned your where you are, but sometimes it feels like you have to prove yourself.
So much of the culture of the academy tries to be a neck up experience. So it is still difficult to introduce women's bodies into the experience. And then the messiness of women's bodies coming, it was striking to me when Sarah just said I might be nursing, right? So I can't imagine, like colleagues would just like pass out if they thought there was a woman at the faculty table, saying, right? Because bodies aren't supposed to be there. And then the messiness of a woman's body who is having children, has had children, is planning to have children, becomes visible in that culture. The culture is just not prepared to deal with her body.
I remember nursing in my office, and I had a male colleague kind of knock on the door. They didn't know I was nursing, or anything. They just knocked on the door, and I was like, I'm nursing. Okay. Oh, sorry. Is it going to be done soon? He just didn't quite know what to. And I'm sure, again, the intentions were, probably well, but because that's not a thing that he has ever had to think about, or at least in that way, because we're in the academy, we're at work, we're in our office. Yeah, but I have to bring that here because I'm still expected to produce. So I still have to come and bring my little one and nurse. And you're going to be okay sitting on the side of that door and me telling you that I'm nursing and you'll wait. And I'll get to you when I can. But it was a very awkward moment. And then afterwards, it was kind of hard for him to look me in the eyes. It's like, it's okay. I was nursing. It's okay.
And not every place is designed for you to nurse. So that's the other thing. Like, what if you have to go into the bathroom? I mean, you have to really make provision for yourself to figure out how you can nurse or even just pump, right? During the day. And you have to be on a schedule when you pump in. And so that schedule automatically kind of interrupts what you're doing. And so once again, just this idea that the academy really is not designed for mothers.
So have the messages that you've received that if you are nursing, if you are about the business of children and parenting, then you have divided loyalties and you're not a good scholar? Is that the weakness that you're talking about?
Absolutely. You just named it. That's absolutely how I feel sometimes. And so I have to choose, right? Yeah.
Go ahead, Ekaterina, I see you.
I think the academy. Oh yeah. I was just thinking about what you guys said, and I think this the academy has come a long way in acknowledging people's our embodied particularities as important for our teaching and as something which matters for our perspectives as scholars in teaching. The way our body marked in a way matter. And we see that being acknowledged with our racial selves, with our ethnic selves, with our cultural selves. And I wish the day will come when the way our bodies are marked as mothers by our pregnancies, by our post-childbirth state, by our nursing state, would also be acknowledged as important in the way they affect us as teachers, in the way they affect us as scholars, and not something which is strange or unprofessional or awkward or something which people don't know how to engage. Even wonderful and well-meaning colleagues are not sure how to engage that. But that this will be engaged just as another particular mark of our embodiment, which would be embraced and celebrated and seen as an asset, as opposed to an embarrassment or a strange dimension, which we don't know how to engage.
And in many respects, we're talking about basic communal rights, basic communal processes and procedures. I had a friend who, she and her twins, because her childcare fell through, she brought her twins, I think they were about 9-10 months, they were in the little crates, to a faculty meeting, and they were not being disruptive. To which case a colleague said, "I can't believe you brought those children here," and just infuriated my colleague, and she left with her twins. So how women with children need childcare, right? These are the same issues that are in larger society that we find in our particular context, in our particular schools. And Ekaterina, I agree with you. I think we have thought through some of the justice issues, but thinking them through but living equitably are not the same thing.
That's right.
So we would have the same colleagues who are writing about issues of justice that would also invite my colleague to take her twins and leave a faculty meeting.
And it's just, it's frustrating, right? It's just even just the thinking about this and thinking about like some of the past things that have been experienced or that other colleagues have had to experience is so frustrating because you'll get those comments and then in some of their mind, they still don't even understand that was not just. They don't even understand the implications of those words. They don't understand how it affects, because again, as Sarah was saying, the guilt and the shame that comes with it of having to show up here, but also I have to care for my child. I also still have to produce. So I have to bring them to this meeting. I have to come and do this. And realizing that comments like that do so much damage. And then when they just get to say it and it goes, they're not held accountable. They're not held, nothing comes of it. I feel like it continues to cultivate this space of just not just inequity, but just of almost just a dangerous space of being able to be and not be able to bring my full self. Right.
She was humiliated. The colleague was humiliated, and then which is a kind of violence in the space.
Yes.
Right. So how do you, as a colleague who has been publicly humiliated by another colleague, who chose to show up at the faculty meeting when given a choice, this faculty meeting is important, let me make sure and show up. She was told she made the wrong choice. Now, in my analogy, I think she was told her wrong choice was having those kids, not bringing them to the faculty meeting.
Right.
Mm-hmm. See, real women scholars don't have kids. Is it that harsh?
That's what it feels like it says. And then if you're, and then I'm thinking, okay, well, what about the other colleagues at the table and how do we, speak up for each other and realize I know the three of us that are here, we identify as kind of more junior scholars, like coming in and thinking, well, where are our, senior scholars who can have
allies, right?
The allies, yes, say, hey, bring that baby over here. I was at one meeting and I had an amazing senior scholar that I had to bring, give me that baby. I was like, yes, here you go. Mm-hmm. But that's not everywhere. Everyone isn't going to have that. And so how do we, yes, my goodness, sorry, it just frustrates me. And at the same time, I'm like, how do we cultivate this space of allyship, but also, calling out when people make these really violent and dangerous comments and how do we make that part of the space? How do we make that a regular part, realizing that that's part of our, as Ekaterina said, part of our identity as people and our bodies and what it means and making space for that.
Honestly, sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah. No,
I was just going to say that, honestly, I don't always feel like it's been modeled well. Because, senior scholars, I'm like, I know you have children. Like, what did you do? Like, when you was, like, walking through this process hasn't changed. What did you do? And I think sometimes even when I think about bringing my children, because I have to, it's a good reminder. Though humiliating, sometimes it's a good reminder for your colleagues. Like, I just want you to know, when I put out that book or when I put out that article, it took some extra work. And, sometimes seeing my child is an object lesson for the academy. And I just feel like in some ways, like, even the scholars and our students, they need to see it modeled in a different way. Like, in some ways, I feel a responsibility to model what it means to be a whole person in the academy, because I don't think it's always been modeled well for me. I was blessed, because I had a group of women scholars as we were going through our PhD program who were mothers, and we just kind of formed our own little network, or as we've been talking about it, like an alternative space, and we just kind of passed things to each other. That kept me sane, and it made me realize that I wasn't in this alone, because sometimes being a mother in the academy can be a very lonely process. And even if there are other mothers in there, but if they don't, I don't know, if it's kind of like a secret, of the things that you have to do. So,
but that's back to the shame that you mentioned, Sarah. There's a shaming, there's a blaming and a shaming that tends to be associated with motherhood in the academy, or in certain particular schools or certain climates in the academy. Talk more about you are talking about the shaming, right? That somehow if you would just keep your children hidden, right? If you would not show what you did, then we could respect you as a real scholar. That's twisted, right? That is not welcoming the whole person. That is not saying that you deserve to be here in all of your you-ness, right? If I can say it that way. That you can, but leave your most generative self hidden in the corner somewhere. That is not the kind of scholarship we would want to push forward.
My best scholarship comes. Oh, go ahead, Katarina.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that most of my best scholarship comes like from moments that I'm with from mothering or ideas that I get from playing with my son, or like that's when the best stuff comes for me. I'm like, my work is made better because of my mother and my child. That's all I was going to throw in there. But go ahead, Katarina.
Oh, no, I think that's so important what you brought up about motherhood being as a resource as opposed to a burden. But what I originally wanted to say, thinking about the point Lynn made, I think this is also the question of shame and insecurity many early career female academics about them being mothers bringing their children in, let's say in the faculty meeting. I think it's also the question of power dynamic. And I do have to say, I've been extremely privileged. I had moments when I had to bring my infant to faculty meetings. I had times when I had to bring my infant to faculty development meetings. And in my institution, everyone was extremely supportive. And I was just very privileged to have understanding colleagues. So I do want to acknowledge that reality. But at the same time, I think that what oftentimes happens is when women have young children are the years in their grad school or the years on tenure track as assistant professors. Again, that's not true for everyone, but that's true for many of us. And these are the years of the greater professional vulnerability, when I think a lot of us assistant professors are very aware that we are on tenure track and we don't want to do the wrong thing, and we don't want to do things which would not fit in or anger people who hold more power over us in this career. And that's what I think brings many early career mothers, makes them more hesitant over even asking if, let's say, their childcare fall through, if that's okay for them to bring their child in, precisely because they're hesitant. They don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to do unprofessional, which makes the dean of their administration think that they somehow take their family, more seriously than their work or anything like that. So I think this real question of the different power, I think the problem of the power dynamic is very real when we talk about early career academic mothers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, without a doubt. And the sacrifices that are made to say, either I'm going to ignore or neglect my children and immerse myself in my career, or I'm going to ignore my career, right? So that I always say, don't trust the dichotomy, right? If there's only two choices, don't make don't make the choice, right? So how do we get, as Ekaterina was talking about, how do we get faculty that both embrace children, but also see that, again, I'm back to labor laws, having childcare on your campus is important for even the smallest school, right? Having multiple kinds of leaves that can be tapped into are part of the school culture, right? Understanding that sick leave might not be you're the person who's sick, it might be your children are sick. You still have to stay home with those children.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking, because I know you were mentioning the shame and guilt, and it's dawning on me. I mean, not dawning on me, I know, but I mean, I'm just thinking about the many ways that we become mothers, right? Whether it's, physically, whether it's, adoption, whether it's surrogates. I mean, just the many ways that this happens, and the processes for many and how it's very different, whether it's, there's fertility issues, in vitro. I mean, just the many ways that it happens and how it's a process over time. So even just the expectation, as we were talking about, like, of getting back to work and having to be able to produce, and like the shame and guilt that comes with, maybe you don't want to share your process. Maybe you're not ready to talk about miscarriage and loss that has led to this. So not only are you telling me to get these kids out of here, you don't know the process it took for me to bring these kids here. And so when you're saying that they don't belong here, you're saying a whole lot more than that to me. You know what I mean? Just all of that you don't know the process that it took. You don't know what's going on in anybody's body or anybody's life or anyone's situation. And so the shame and guilt that's also built on top of that, if we're not able to do certain things, or if our bodies can't do certain things in certain ways that, society tells us it's supposed to. And so I think it continues that a lot of that shame and guilt, and realizing that there's there's a story before these kids came, when they're here, and then after, and realizing that all of that is a part of this process and what it means to show up in these spaces, and how some days it is really difficult to show up in this space and hear you say that, and then deal with my own guilt and shame, realizing you don't know my story. That got me here.
I also don't think it is necessarily along gender lines that if we have a woman president, a woman dean, she will understand how motherhood impacts a faculty person, because she so often has modeled herself after all of the patriarchy that she has inherited. I also don't want to say because he, right, is a man, he won't understand issues of productivity, understand issues of shame and guilt. So much of this is about how are we intentional about understanding and are compassionate for the situations that our faculty colleagues find themselves in, as well as understanding that body is a part of our profession. This is not a neck up profession. And when you're talking about women's bodies, you're talking about things like pregnancy, nursing, labor, giving birth, those, and then the children that remain in the place called families, right, after they're born. It is both a complicated situation and a peculiar situation, because families, you can't get more iconic in our society than nurturing a family. But so much of the academy has not made space for nurturing of those moments, that phenomena in our own society. What can people do? You mentioned some of those things. How can people be helpful?
I think incentives for self-care is one way, because we know self-care is important, and we just talked about how hard it is. And I think that one of the reasons why it's so hard is because it's not organic. It has to be done intentionally, and there has to be effort even put into caring for the self, even simple things, right? And so I think support looks like providing incentives for people to actually care for themselves in the academy.
And caring for self might mean looking at what tenure process makes sense given the families that people have, that everybody, one size does not fit all, even in terms of tenure and promotion.
Yeah.
That sounds like a radical thing, but one size doesn't fit all.
Do you think we'll move in that direction?
I'm going to say yes.
I want to hope. I want to be optimistic.
That's right. I'm going to say yes.
And I wonder what it would look like just to ask. Like, I get that sometimes, faculty don't have to, administration and institutions don't have to ask these questions because maybe they haven't had, a young woman come on their faculty, recently. And so now these are new questions that they're having to wrestle with that maybe they haven't had to wrestle with in a while. And that's okay. But maybe just ask, what do I need? Ask what would be helpful. I would be happy to engage that conversation. Is there a way we can get some childcare here? Is there a way that we could maybe have our meetings during nap time? I realize everything can't change, but just realizing, hey, can I be in an office where I can maybe plug in a fridge so that I can store milk that I might need to store during the day? And, I'll put a sign in my door, making sure that it's more comfortable to be in this space. I think just asking maybe what the needs are would be really, really helpful, and not making that seem as wrong, not making it seem like
or
I have
weak,
to,
right? Or weak,
yes,
right? We'll accommodate you, but we're going to remember that when we, at promotion, at tenure time,
like not making us feel like we have to bring up these things at meetings and like put our bodies on the line and sacrifice. Like that's not equitable. That's not helpful. So just having the conversation, maybe having some things beforehand, realizing, hey, this is an important conversation. Maybe after listening to this podcast, you decide we need to go revisit our policies, whether we have someone here that is a mother or not. Let's go and let's think about how maybe we need to give them more than 6 weeks. Let's go and think about, of leave. Let's go and think about how we've set it up so that however families, are made or come together, that everyone has equity in space, whether it's, physical or adoption or whatever the journey is. And so I just think starting some of those policies now so that we don't have to put our bodies on the line in faculty meetings, asking for things and being that person and having to do those constant things, I think would be helpful. And just also not saying those little things like, oh, when are you going to have another one? Or how? Those are actually really not not.
And none of your business.
None of you. My body is not your business.
Not your business.
Oh.
We should be able to say that it's none of your business and not be slighted for that. So, and again, simple things. If you have a colleague that always has to leave the faculty meeting at 3:30 because the school bus gets there at 3:40, then you need to think about moving the faculty meeting, not always having that colleague miss the next 2 hours of conversation, right? Those kinds of awareness, mindfulness, rather than saying there's something wrong with the colleague and why doesn't that person work it out?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's difficult and challenging to have an integrated life when you're a scholar.
Yeah.
When you're a woman whose passion is scholarship, right? Who's pursuing this career in scholarship. And that so often we feel like the divided self, the fragmented self, the person who thinks that the sacrifice, that self-care, we're supposed to not take care of ourselves. Like there's so many messages. That's what Sarah was talking about earlier. There's so many messages that say it's better if you don't take care of yourself. That's deadly, right? That's deadly.
Mm-hmm. Just keep pouring out, keep taking care of the babies, keep showing up at work. It'll be okay. You can care about yourself later. Meanwhile, all these other things are happening to you and that you can't show up and you can't be your full self, and it affects everything else around you. It's a cycle.
Well, and then the COVID pandemic, I'm sure, has just made things even more stressful, more difficult for parenting as people are trying to show up in their classes online with children in the room as they're literally hiding from children in closets. You know, we've seen all those scenarios, right, of trying to be present to your children while staying at home. A lot of that is we're still not done with that, right? We're still going to be working from home and parenting in the same homes and in the same spaces. So the difficulty has just compounded itself in this moment.
I would also add that some of the difficulties why taking time for self-care is so difficult for many of us is that we are not immediately experiencing the same pressures to take care of ourselves as we would experience pressures to do other things. The academy puts pressure on us to publish. Our institutions put pressure on us to teach well and to publish. Our kids oftentimes put pressure on us to spend time with them. Any mother of young children would know that when a young child wants their mothers, they will make it known. But so few of us experience the same kinds of pressures in a good way to take care of ourselves. So that's I think that's one of the reasons why it's so easy to prioritize all these other things where you feel under institutional, communal, relational, familial, or other pressures to do, as opposed to one thing is take care of your body. Although ultimately it's all interrelated. If we are consistently sleep deprived and exhausted and never exercise and have to survive on fast food, we end up being worse scholars, worse teachers, worse mothers, and worse citizens.
But then I also think a theological message kind of undergirds this, because there's kind of this message that if you are fulfilling yourself in any kind of way, that's a bad thing, that's self-indulgent, that's selfish, that's narcissistic. And it kind of, once again, goes against your ability to care for yourself guilt-free, shame-free, even though that's exactly what is needed. To show up wherever you go, right? To be whole wherever you go.
And also to be whole wherever you go and to be in the arc for the long haul.
Yeah.
Right. So it is the rare scholar who does their best work before tenure, before promotion, right? Usually you hit your stride at year 8 or 9, not 2 or 3. So if you are beaten down and beaten up and violated early on, and there's not enough left to get to your best work, then, you know, shame on us, right? Shame on us as a community for not creating systems where we can get the best out of folks.
Yeah, folks, we can thrive, not just hang on and survive, but like just genuinely thrive. I think it's so rare.
Yeah, the opposite of thriving, I think, is toxicity. we become toxic in those spaces because we can't function or focus the way, we would if we were at a good place inside.
So, and I hear you all advocating for an alternative space, right? For a different way to approach these things, not just in a case by case basis, which is better than nothing, but for us to look at these systems and say, mothers have to be welcomed. Motherhood has to be a part of how we understand what good scholarship looks like, right? Suppose good scholarship looks like a pregnant woman, right? That's a good scholar.
Yes.
That's what a good scholar looks like, right? I said to a colleague the other day, he didn't understand. I said, wherever there are women, there are children. And he didn't understand, and I didn't stop to explain it. But that's wherever we go, our children go with us, right? And even if you're a woman who has not given birth to her own children, you're still responsible for children. That women and children go together in many respects. Now, granted, we can opt out of those. We can make those personal decisions to opt out for many reasons. But if the academy is increasingly becoming, scholars are increasingly becoming a higher and higher percentage of women in PhD programs, women in colleges, universities, and seminaries, we bring our children with us.
And how do we make those spaces ready? And it shouldn't take someone coming to get your space ready. Get it ready now, and hope that they will come. That they will come. To start getting it ready now. Have these conversations now. Change the policy now. Don't wait. Just start making those spaces now, so that when they get there, they're like, "Oh, this is what it feels like to be in a space like this. This is wonderful."
That's right.
Thank you. Let people start having those conversations now, so that when it happens, it's not that shock value. It's not I'm just trying to survive and you're changing everything and I have to put my body on the line for everything to get changed, because no one wants that.
What would it take to welcome and make mothers feel like they belong in these spaces, right? As scholars, as teachers, as theologians, as people who are passionate about their own scholarship. Well, thank you so much for this very important conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And please come back. Well, I mean, there's more to talk about, right? So we will definitely have you back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This conversation will be uploaded on video as well as audio. To our viewers and to our listeners, the Wabash Center website is the place to find information on our blogs, on our podcasts, on our grants, our colloquies, and all of our programming. So take a look at our Wabash website. We also thank Paul Myrie in the sound engineer's booth, who also is the composer of our music. We thank Rachel Mills, who's the producer of all of our resources. And we are out. How was that, Paul?